Jai Baba. So I think for this story, which about one of his stays with me years ago, he asked me to tell him, he said, tell me a Baba story. And I said, what Baba story? How do I tell you a Baba story? He said, well, you spent time with John, with Baba's brother, which he didn't apparently because of the different duties and jobs they had. So he said, tell me something about John. So this is what came to mind. Now, when, and I'm going to preface it by also by saying that when people would ask Bao about Baba's orders now, they would say, oh, you were fortunate because Baba gave you orders. We don't have orders now. And Bao would ask, I always had to keep ready a copy of my wish. And Bao would have that read out. And the first item on there was to fulfill your responsibilities. So my first trip to India in '76, in those days there was no Pilgrim Center, couldn't stay at the Pilgrim Center because there wasn't one. So we would go Monday, we could go out to Mehrabad. We would stay, I believe, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday we would have to come home or leave. And most weekends, we were there for 3 months at that time, and most weekends we would go to Pune, and we would spend the weekends with Baba's brother John in Pune. And he was, wherever he told us to stay, that's where we stayed. It made no difference to us. It was just such a joy to be with him. And there's one hotel that he wanted us to stay at, and I don't remember the name of it, I have no idea if it's still there, but when you entered, I remember to the left was the reception counter to check in, and then there was a lovely staircase that you had to walk up, and all our room was on the top of that fairly wide staircase, just to the left, right at the head of the stairs. So we checked in, Jal walked up with us, we checked out our room, and he said, okay, now rest and I'll come back and get you. And he checked his watch. It might have been, by the time we got to Pune, it might have been in the afternoon. He said, we'll come for dinner. And he, like clockwork, he said, now I will be here at 7:30, I believe he said. Now, you stay in your room, don't come out of your room. He said, when I come here, I will knock on your door. You will say, who is it? I will say, Jai Baba. You will say, Jai Baba, and only then open the door. So sure enough, we rested, we refreshed ourselves, put on clean clothes. Jal came exactly as he said, and looking at my watch, exactly the time, I believe 7:30. Knock on the door, who is it? Jai Baba. Jai Baba unlocked the door, and off we went to go to whatever restaurant he wanted to go to. Then he walked back upstairs to put us into our room to make sure, and locked us in, made sure we locked the door, and he said, now don't go out. Then he fixed time for the morning, which was, I guess, Saturday morning, because we got there Friday. Saturday morning, the same thing. I'm going to be, I think, 8 o'clock in the morning. Sure enough, right on time, there he was, the same Jai Baba, Jai Baba. The same thing at tea time, and then again at dinner. And he's walking up and down this flight of stairs, and at that time, Jal was, I guess, my age now. The stairs were challenging, I would imagine, for him. So now Sunday morning, he's going to meet us at 8 o'clock. We're going to go have breakfast. And then afterwards, we take the bus to go back to Nagar. And again, he had left us Saturday with the same instructions. But I had this idea that it would be better for us to meet him downstairs to save him the trouble of walking up the stairs. So it was about 5 of 8. Now he, as I say, you could set his he had a Mickey Mouse watch. You could set it was absolutely set. He'd do this, we'll see what Mickey says, and the time was there. So with a red band, I'll never forget that. So it was 8 o'clock in the morning, 5 of 8, I said, let's go downstairs, we'll save him the trouble of coming up. I opened the door, and there was Jal with his foot on the top step. He looks at me, and I could see the disappointment on his face. And he said, where are you going? I said, Jal, I'm going downstairs. He said, why? I said, Jal, you're walking up and down the stairs, and we're rested, and there's no problem. We could walk downstairs. He said, you don't understand. He said, you're my responsibility. If anything happened to you, Baba would not be happy with me. He said, now go back in the room and lock your door. We went back in the room and locked the door. He walked back downstairs because I could hear him. After a couple of minutes, knock on the door. Who is it? Jai Baba, Jai Baba. I looked at my watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. He never said another word. He didn't need to. Bao told me, he said, this is a very important story. He said, share it with as many people as you can. The backstory is that even as a child, I wanted to be a Franciscan. So I was having a love affair with Catholicism. And I used to think how unfortunate it was that I was not alive at the time of Jesus. And then through a series of circumstances, even as a child, I recognized the hypocrisy that I was seeing in religions, organized religions. And decided I was going to be as worldly as I could be and not pay any attention to religion. I had no concept of God. Really, I hadn't thought about it, and this was during the hippie days of the 60s. And I was, sort of not really searching for anything. I was married, I had a newborn son, but I discovered rented an empty home on the beach in Cocoa Beach, Florida, that I was going to convert into a hair salon. And there was no furniture in there. There was a built-in bookcase, and on this built-in bookcase was a little photograph of Baba. And it said, I have one message to give age after age, and that is to love God. And I thought, well, that's nice. But I was doing yoga. I was, trying to figure out how I could, make things move when, using my mind, that kind of stuff. And I met people who were a couple of people were going to go overland. They said, there's this old man in India who claims to be God. They were going to go overland to try and meet Baba. Matter of fact, one of these fellows had actually sent money to Baba. And Baba sent it back and said, what I want is your love, not your money. So that's how I heard Baba's name, which was 1968, right about 50 years ago from now. And then within a very short period of time, like weeks, I was at work. I converted this, was not much to do, put furniture in, and we had a salon. And this friend of mine came up and he said, did you move over the weekend? And I said, no, why? Why do you ask me that? He said, I went by your place, there's nothing there, it's empty, the curtains are down, everything. I said, you're crazy, it was only 2 blocks away. And I went there, and I was married at the time. My wife was gone. My child, our child, she had taken him, everything gone. And I was distraught. And had absolutely no, this is in the 60s, I had no money. I was a kid. There was no, I didn't have any experience with any of that, so I had no idea where to go for help. So I decided I was going to kill myself. But I realized probably even then that it wasn't serious, because if you're seriously going to kill yourself, it's a gun, you jump off a 5-story building. For me, what I did is looked around and gathered as many pills and things as I could find, swallowed them, and then started calling my friends to tell them I was killing myself. Nobody was home. I couldn't get anybody. I finally got one friend of mine. When I told him what I was doing, he said, killing yourself? I said, yeah. He said, can I have all your shit after you're dead? And I got so angry that nobody was there. I literally was nobody. My wife, child, my parents were emotionally very distant from me because I wasn't living the life that they thought I should be living. And I was physically removed from family. I hadn't been in this town long enough. I had no friend, a few friends, and I couldn't get them. But so I got so angry, I drove myself to the emergency room of the local hospital, told them what I did, and the doctor gave me whatever, Epicac or whatever to throw up. And I remember there was this, those days they had what they called orderlies, which were men usually who would do some of the physical work to help nurses. And this particular fellow was, I was in my 20s, this fellow must have been maybe a 40, 50-year-old, just a gentle, big black man and I remember enormous eyes that just really penetrated. And after I was sort of stable in the emergency room, the doctor told this fellow to stay with me while he tended to other patients. So I was laying on the gurney on my side, and he's sitting there facing me, and I'm crying and feeling bad for myself. And he said, "Son, that's a damn foolish thing you did." And I said, "You don't understand." He said, "What don't I understand?" I said, "Nobody loves me." And he said, "Son," he said, "God loves you." And at that moment, I saw Baba's picture that I had seen in my salon that said, "I have only one message to give age after age, and that is to love God." And this fellow saying, "God loves you." And I realized then that all I needed, that I was going to love God, He was going to love me. So I would say that was the beginning of my, I'd say, coming to Baba. And then shortly after that, moving on to sort of the early 70s, so only 2-3 years later, I met a woman, came in for a haircut. We ended up getting married, and she got pregnant immediately. In the meanwhile, I had a friend, one of these fellows that was going overland to meet Baba, who ended up going to Baba's Samadhi. He did not get to see Baba. He was there probably 71. But he became close to Jal, Baba's brother. And Jal, somehow or other, my name came up, and Jal asked for my address from him, which he gave him. And then shortly after that, I started getting letters from Baba's brother Jal. "I miss you. When are you coming to India?" And I thought, "When do you miss me?" And there were no books about Baba at the time. None. I had met Ann Forbes in Miami, because this Baba contact who went to India was from the Miami group, and he knew Ann Forbes, and I actually went down there and had a lovely day with Ann Forbes. So I was beginning to get a little bit of a sense that there was something different with these. And Ann Forbes, by the way, Bob had said that she was one of his Western Mongoli. And if I remember it later, there's a very sweet little side story with Ann Forbes that she told me that's, well, matter of fact, I'll tell it now. And so Ann told me, she said because she's telling me something about Baba. I didn't know how she ended up in Miami or whatever. Or I had no idea. I didn't even think to ask her about how she met Baba. None of that stuff came to mind. But she showed me a little packet, sort of like the kind of packet that Alka-Seltzers would come in, and it's called Fizzies. And what that is, you tear that open, you drop the ingredients in a glass of water, and you've got sort of like a sparkling fruit drink or sweet drink. And she told me that she got a cable from Baba, and Baba told her that on a particular day, which was a Sunday, she had to collect a certain number of packets of Fizzies. And she said she went out, started driving all around Miami. Now in those days they had blue laws, a lot of stores were closed. A couple places she went into, they had none. Somebody else had one or two. She said it took her the entire day. And just shortly before Baba had given her the time frame to do this, she ended up getting the required number. She cabled Baba, and he apparently cabled back that he was happy. She never sent them. He never asked her to send them. She did show me a map of Miami, and she said she realized afterwards that she had gone completely around the city of Miami. So, who knows what Baba was doing, catching people in his net. So now Jal is writing to us, my wife is pregnant, come to India. I write back and I said, how am I going to go to India? I have a pregnant wife and we have no money. And he would add, very sweet letters and be resigned to Baba's wish and will. And this correspondence went on and on. And then towards the end of the pregnancy, 8th month, 7th month, he said, now, if the baby is a boy, name him Rama, and if it's a girl, name her Sita. And somehow or other, that did not seem unusual for us. We said, okay. And he would also include messages to this unborn baby. I can't wait to see you again. I miss you. And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. This man he must be nuts, is all I could think of. What's he talking about? But somehow or other, the child was born Christmas Eve. It was a beautiful little boy. And we named him Ramajal, which Mansari burst out laughing when we finally told her, after going to India, that because she wanted to know his name, and she laughed and laughed. We stood there looking at each other. We didn't. She said, what you named that child? I said, no, Ramajal. And she said, well, Rama is one of the names of God. And Jal in Hindi, one of the meanings, it's a snare or a trap. She said, you named your baby God's snare, God's trap. So the child lived only 2 weeks and died. They knew that the death was a cerebrovascular accident, but no cause of, they couldn't tell why. We received the letter 2 weeks after the baby died from Jal. In those days, airmails would take 2 weeks. It was written on the day the baby died, written to us saying, now you are free, now you can come to India. So we had no choice. We knew that he knew something, and we were drawn to go there. And then going to India, by the time we got there, because we first went to Myrtle Beach to put the baby's ashes in the ocean at the center, and stayed on the center and I had been at the center 2 or 3 times before that. So we knew Kitty and Elizabeth and, the other folks that were there. And so we stayed there 2 weeks before going to India, put his ashes in the ocean, went off to India. And by the time we got to India, the Mandali knew about this because of communication, I imagine, back and forth, and they really went out of their way to comfort us and be nice to us. And Mani, she probably had one of the sweetest responses when we told her about this episode. And she said, he just had a few impressions to work out. That was it. There was no, that's all there was to it. So, but as I say, that's why the Baba story is ongoing, because it's, it started my deep personal relationship with the Mandali, because they really looked after us. In some ways that were almost embarrassing. My wife would be up with Mara having tea. I'd be out with the men, and in those days there were only a half a dozen Westerners there. I'd be sitting out outside of Mandali Hall in Mehrabad with Bendu and Erich and Alaba, whoever would be around, and somebody would bring out a tray with mangoes, custard apples, papaya, bring it to me and said, Mara sent this out and said not to share it with anybody. And it was, it was this, I realize now what a huge blessing it was, but at the time it was a bit embarrassing, to be singled out by that. But the Mandali, for whatever their reasons were, it began this intimate time with them when they found out I was a hairdresser. They asked me to do their hair, so I ended up, having that real treat to have that close physical contact. Dr. Goer, and when we left finally from that summer, spent the summer in '76, Dr. Goer told me to go to nursing school. So I went back to Myrtle Beach, and as fate would have it, ended up in nursing school at Coastal just shortly after that. Finished, as I was in nursing school, I thought, I am done with doing hair. That has nothing but vanity behind it. It's all this, I want to look pretty, and this is a 1/4 inch here. And I said, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I want to be a spiritual seeker. And I thought, I'll be a nurse and I will be a service to humanity. And 1977, I think, I had a little tiny hair salon because I had to earn some income, and going to nursing commuter school during the day, and I got a phone call from Adi, was at the center, got a phone call from Jack Small, asked me if I would do Adi's hair, and I thought, oh my God, yes. So he came, and then I began to really appreciate, that something that I looked at as a burden and a vanity. And here I had, because of that career, I had the opportunity to physically touch and be of service in that sense to the Mandali. And Adi was particularly funny because it was only a two-chair shop, so there was nobody there but he and I. And he wore his hair very, very short, and his hands were all arthritic already by then, so he couldn't open his hands really. And he just sat there with his eyes closed the entire time. He would touch his head like this and go, short, sir, cut my head short. And I would just quietly, everything quiet, and then I would cut his hair and do the best I could. And then the way you announce, or that I announced that I was finished, I would take the cape off and shake it off, and that would be the message to tell the person you were done. And Adi said, without opening his eyes, "You finished that?" I said, "Yes, I am finished," like that. Oh, it's very good, very good. Now, cut it again, please, shorter. So that one haircut, I don't know, I really don't remember how long it took, but I realized afterwards it was just his time to be away from the whatever was, he was, all the people with the loads of questions that we all have witnessed, we've all participated in. And then after that, it was sort of like the floodgates opened. As far as, Kitty would send people up for me to do their hair, because people would show up in those days, men would show up in those days completely unkempt. So it was, I began to appreciate my career. And when I finished nursing school, we went back to India and spent, I think, 2 months at that time, a month at that time. And then the women started asking me to cut their hair. So that was beyond fun, because after everybody would go, after the buses would leave, I got to stay with the women on the veranda, and they'd be chatting and sharing their money, be sitting there typing. We had a salon, and my middle name is Rocco, and it turns out that Katie's hairdresser, when she lived in Bombay, for years working at the Japanese embassy, I believe, her Italian hairdresser was Rocco. So she would always say, "Oh, Rocco, do my hair," and she had beautiful, beautiful hair. So, it was, as I said, I began to appreciate the skills and talents that Baba gives us that we have no idea how they can be used for him. Hopefully they'll be used for him. So I was at Mehrabad in the Pilgrim Center, and Eric Nadal, he was wandering around. He said, "Nick," he said, "Mohammed's barber hasn't come today. He would come once a week. He said, would you cut Mohammed's hair, would you?" I said, "Cut his hair? He doesn't have any hair." He said, "No, he gets a shave." He said, "Will you do that?" He shaved his head, shaved his face. I said, "Certainly." Ran to get my stuff. He said, "Hurry up." So I went, and Mohammed, reference back to Padre, would refer to Westerners as, or at Padre would call them loonies, and Mohammed referred to us as mad Iranis. So Eric said to Mohammed, he said, "Mad Irani barber." So Mohammed agreed for me. And I was just, sort of in this kind of busy state, not really thinking about what was going on. And the servant woman comes over with hot water, and Mohammed's sitting in a sling chair, completely bent over, and I didn't even think about how I was going to do this, because most people you'd be up or back for those kind of services. But anyway, squatting down. Fortunately, I was wearing those baggy Indian clothes so I could squat without ripping everything. And I'm squatting down and I wet his head and I put some soap on the shave stuff on his head. And of course I had been told Muhammad knows everybody's thoughts. And I know a lot of people were afraid to be near Muhammad, but I wasn't up until that moment. And just as I got all the shave cream on his head and I started to draw the razor over his head, he said to Alan, who translated for me, he said, Muhammad said, "Don't hurt me." And all of a sudden, I realized what I was about to do. Baba's favorite must. And Baba had said that if a must curses you, he said, there's nothing I can do. So I'm trying to only say Baba's name because if Muhammad's listening to my thoughts, I don't want my thoughts to be of, apple pie and Pepsi. What? So I go, Baba, 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 Baba. And I draw the blade over his head, and sure enough, I see what looks like a drop of blood on top of his head. And I thought, oh, Baba, I've cut him. And immediately he tells Alan, no, tell him no, he did not cut me. He didn't hurt me. It turned out that was a little blood blister on his head that I hadn't noticed before. So anyway, I ended up finishing and with that. But that was, the one and only time, but I say that the incredible blessing of being able to do this service for these people. So, what else? Another Baba story. Here's a fun one with going back to Jal. So this first trip, we had just lost a child. We were young, energetic, and Eric takes a small group, it was only, say, half a dozen people, to Happy Valley. And we're in a Shiva Lingam. If people know what that is, Shiva is the god of creation. So this little cave, it's sort of like a 4-foot tall phallus. And very small space around it, and at the base of this phallus, about this image of this stone phallus, about waist high, looks like the labia. And the people who would come in, who are followers, I guess, or believers, they would come in, they would break a coconut on this phallus, and then catch the coconut milk as it would come down. And so it's, for Westerners, of course, it's creation, but it's a strong sexual connotation. And Eric is standing on one side of this giant thing, and I'm on the other side with my wife. And Eric says, unless and until you give up sex, you can't enter the path of love. And I thought, well, I'm out of here. This is not for me. I've made a mistake. So that weekend, we go back to Pune, and Jal had this habit of asking, and which Eric did also, what's on your mind? What are you thinking? So I'm with Jal, and he said, what do you think? I said, Jal, I think we're going to leave to go back. We'll change our flights and leave. He said, why? I said, I don't think this is for us. And because that was one of the ways we sought comfort with each other, was in intimacy. And he said, why do you say that? Why? So I told him, I said, I've heard that unless and until you give up sex, you should run into the path of love. He said, who told you such nonsense? I said, Eric. He said, and I quote, Eric is new to Baba, he does not know what he's talking about. He said, with your wife, you can do anything. And it was, to me, not only was it a momentary reprieve, and to sort of put that other out of my mind, but it also, the most important thing, which to this day, the impact is that regardless of what you hear from anybody, even the Mandali, it still comes down to your own discretion, your own thoughts. You have to figure out, what do I do in this situation? Because here we have Eric, who's very clear and very definite, and here's John, who's Baba's brother, and I don't know that anybody would have dared say that about Eric except one of Baba's family members. Who else could say that? He had been with Baba years before Eric joined Baba. So, and one other reminds me a little Eric Bao story. Bao told me, because we would, one of his trips to the West, and I asked him about, this difficulty in trying to figure out the right thing to do. He said it's never easy. And he told me that he was the chairman of the trust at the time. There was a government official, needed some paper signed for the trust. The government official told him he would do it, but he had to pay some under-the-table money. Pardon me. So Bao went to Eric and Mani. They both told him not to do it. He said he went back, he really thought about it, but he realized that he should do it. He thought he should do it because it needed to be done and it would expedite things. So it was arranged with this city official that Bao would send his driver over to give him the money, and then he would go back the next day and all the signed papers would be there. Bao sent the driver with the money. That night, the fellow had a heart attack and died. And Bao lost all the money because he couldn't go back and say, I had given him money to do something. He wasn't going to, sort of on the side, you might say. So, yeah, this thing that you sort of say you never quite, I think it's maybe Baba's fun so that he knows that we're going to struggle, because you can never feel satisfied. Never feel like you got it right. There's always, so here's Bao saying, Eric Chamani gave him one instruction, he did his own way, and that's what happened.
So Baba says to listen to ourselves ultimately, even if it's, but it's tricky.
Yeah, I think one of the early things that I read from Baba that really struck me, he said, if you hear anything, even from me, if it doesn't ring true in your heart, follow your heart.